This video is brought to you by the Logitech Lightspeed Wireless range of keyboards, mice and headsets, the benchmark in wireless gaming performance.
First released back in 2013 on the Wii U, Super Mario 3D World has returned, this time on Nintendo Switch. And that's great news, as 3D World is one of the best games on Wii U, offering a perfect blend of 2D and 3D Mario design concepts. But this Switch version offers a lot more than just the original 3D World. There's also an entirely separate game included as well, Bowser's Fury. Here we see Nintendo try out some new, rather unexpected ideas that feel remarkably fresh, and it's beefy enough to stand alone as its very own game. So today we'll check out both of these titles. That means comparing 3D World against the original Wii U release, scoping out performance on both titles, and discussing various other technical changes. So, without further ado, let's get into it. In many ways, Super Mario 3D World is the closest Nintendo ever came to fusing 2D and 3D Mario gameplay concepts. 3D World mixes full 3D movement and exploration with more linear stage design and, most importantly, a run button. Now, the player has limited camera control and progression is very much rooted in the old school design, but despite this, it still feels like a 3D Mario game. Even the world map, clearly inspired by the style of design introduced in Super Mario Bros. 3, takes on a new twist with free movement. And all of this holds true on Switch as well. Like most other Mario games before it, 3D World holds up beautifully, both gameplay-wise and visually. But in an unusual twist, Nintendo has gone back and altered the game mechanics slightly in bringing 3D World to the Switch. Specifically, movement speed has been boosted significantly, resulting in a faster playing game all around. Starting in the first stage, for instance, if we press forward at the same time on both machines, Mario arrives at the steps much earlier than he does on Wii U, where the walking speed is absurdly low. It's a curious change then, because fundamentally the game is still great on Wii U, it's just that the walking itself is rather useless due to its slow speed. On Switch, both walking and running each have their place now. When you need more precision, you can walk and it doesn't feel as if you're dragging your feet through mud. So yeah, overall I think it's a nice change and it does improve the pacing of the game. Another change worth mentioning, the touchscreen sections. On Wii U, there's stages like this, which relied on the touchscreen built into the gamepad. If you tried to play without the gamepad, you got this message instead. Obviously, this isn't going to fly on Switch, where a touchscreen is only available in portable mode. So Nintendo has instead added a cursor control using the built-in gyroscope to allow you to manipulate the environment without using a touchscreen. I can say it works well enough given the constraints, but honestly I do prefer using touch for these specific stages. But there's really no other way to tackle this problem, I suppose. But what about the visual makeup? How does that differ? Well, by and large, the game looks virtually identical to the original Wii U release. All the assets are the same, of course, and they're used in exactly the same way. You'd be hard-pressed to find any differences at all. This is a straight-up transplant in that regard, which honestly isn't a bad thing, as the game still holds up remarkably well. Nintendo's art design in 3D remains timeless. We do, however, see a difference in terms of image quality, and this one is rather unusual. For starters, the Wii U version is of course capped at 720p. In comparison, in terms of raw pixel counts at least, the Switch version typically falls between 720 and 1080p, often falling on the upper end of this range, with strange values such as this 29 out of 30 step pixel count. So it averages close to 1080p most of the time, but it is variable. Portable mode then tops out at 720p obviously. But it's not so cut and dried. You see, I have a suspicion that Nintendo is employing some sort of image reconstruction. Check it out, if you play the footage back in slow motion, do you notice something? There's a subtle flicker present on the left side here, almost reminiscent of Bob the Interlacing, where the image shifts between odd and even scan lines. In comparison, on the Wii U side, with its 720p output, it's completely stable in comparison. Now, this flicker isn't especially distracting during gameplay, but it is unexpected and suggests that just running the game at a higher native resolution may have been off the table. Even with this, however, the game definitely appears sharper on Switch, so there is that, but there is some temporal disturbance present throughout this as a result of this technique. It should be noted that Nintendo deployed something similar with Super Mario Odyssey when played in portable mode, but it was vertically oriented instead. Okay, before we move on though, I do want to touch on the one minor visual difference I did discover. Take a look at the shadow effect here on Wii U beneath the coin boxes. Alright, now let's look at the Switch version. Basically on Switch, the shadow is displayed slightly differently and seems to have an issue with the Z intersection between the wall and the shadow itself. So the shadow is now uneven and there are visible glitches within the shadow. Now of course this isn't a shadow map or anything like that, it's just a little trick designed to give depth to the boxes, but it is interesting that the effect doesn't quite work right on Switch. As for performance, well, at least on the 3D World side, this is the least eventful type of frame rate graph you could ask for. As always, this is fantastic news for people playing the game. It's a case of classic Nintendo really. The game targets 60 frames per second, and you will receive 60 frames per second. And crucially, the same is true of portable mode. It's fantastic and very stable. So aside from the resolution quirks, this is pretty much the Wii U game translated successfully to Switch. And that would make for a rather basic video if that's all there was. But it's not. Bowser's Fury is where things take an unexpected turn. Included with 3D World, Bowser's Fury is selectable from the main menu, and it is truly something different. This is effectively a model for a potential new style of 3D Mario game. Rather than breaking things up into stages or areas, Bowser's Fury presents the player with a series of islands and structures across a seamless open world. My view on this is that Bowser's Fury presents a theory on what a 3D Mario game might look like if all stages were included within a singular shared map. So rather than jumping through, say, a painting or flying to another planet, all levels can be accessed seamlessly. But how do you control progression then? Well, this is where Bowser comes in. As you play, a storm will approach at certain points and the music changes. At this point, the sky goes dark and Bowser emerges. As Small Mario, all you can do is avoid his wrath and or use his attacks to uncover otherwise blocked routes. However, collect enough cat shines and you gain access to this giant bell which allows Mario to match Bowser's new size, which results in a battle that changes the scale of the stage itself almost like Katamari Damacy. And this is basically how progression is controlled. The black goop all around the islands basically limits where you can go, and after each boss fight, this increases, allowing you to explore more new areas. It's a really neat idea, and I think it works extremely well, but it also seems to push the Switch hardware pretty hard. For starters, the world itself is surprisingly large and extremely detailed. Each island is packed full of visual flourishes, while effects such as rain, blasts of fire, or even just the screen space reflections used across the water surface really help flesh out the experience. Unlike 3D World, you also have full camera control mapped to the right stick. This, combined with the design of the world itself, means that it's a very different game from 3D World. In fact, it's much closer to a proper 3D Mario sequel, if anything. Of course, the sacrifices are somewhat clear compared to 3D World. The larger areas mean that the resolution is reduced from near 1080p to hanging around 720p up to 792p in select instances. Portable mode then is comparable, surprisingly, coming in around 720p, but there's a reason for this, which we'll discuss shortly. Image quality is basically comparable to something like Super Mario Odyssey, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the increased draw distance and scope of the environment does reveal these flaws more easily, as there's more subpixel shimmering in the distance. Now, more interestingly, Bowser's Fury does not seem to use the reconstruction mode featured in 3D World, so the slight flicker in that game is not present here. And since photo mode analysis is apparently all the rage these days, it is fun to note that this is now an option in Bowser's Fury. It also showcases what the game might look like with improved image quality. Basically, when you switch to this mode, you still have full camera control, but the resolution and shadow map detail is boosted significantly, yet the frame rate drops like a stone as a result. Clearly, with the current Switch, 60 FPS with this level of fidelity is pretty much off the table, but it does kind of give us an idea of what a game like this might look like running on a more powerful iteration of the hardware, something I hope we'll see at some point in the next year or two. But okay, performance is really where things start to get tricky, as we see a level of performance that is unusual for a Nintendo game perhaps. Basically, in docked mode, the game does target 60 frames per second, just like Odyssey and 3D World itself. For the most part, it feels extremely smooth and it plays great, but it is not perfect. Basically, during certain sections, when the storm begins specifically, you might run into situations like this, where momentary frame drops interrupt the fluidity of the experience. In addition, when transitioning between each different section of the world, you'll run into minor stutters like this as the game loads in new assets. At least that's what I think's going on here. When considering the lower resolution and momentary drops then, it certainly feels like this new open concept is pushing the Switch rather hard, and building upon these ideas might require a little more grunt. Still, by and large, the performance is actually quite good and impressive given what's going on in this game. But what really surprised me only becomes visible in portable mode. The reason for the higher rendering resolution I mentioned earlier really comes down to the frame rate. Portable mode is capped at 30 frames per second. Now, this is the same frame rate as Super Mario 3D Land on 3DS and various other 3D titles from Mario's back catalog. So it's not necessarily a huge issue for the series, but it is somewhat jarring to move from a 60 FPS docked experience over to portable mode at 30. Furthermore, while it is mostly stable, busier moments tend to exhibit frame pacing issues like this, which is perhaps more surprising and disappointing. It's one of those rare times we've seen Nintendo take this approach. The development team has opted for superior portable image quality over a higher frame rate, but only when it comes to Bowser's Fury, of course. So that's pretty much where we're at here. Super Mario 3D World itself is a solid porch to the Switch from Wii U, and the concessions made to image quality are fascinating to consider as well. Clearly, the game is slightly more demanding than, say, Mario Kart 8, which delivers a native 1080p experience instead. Even with those concessions, it looks better than it did on Wii U. Bowser's Fury then is an interesting experiment that plays brilliantly while also pushing the Switch pretty hard with its open-ended design. No matter how you slice it, this is an excellent package here. From a gameplay perspective, 3D World remains one of the best polygonal Mario games ever made, if you ask me. It still looks and plays just as well today as it did back on the Wii U at release. In fact, with the increased walking speed, it feels better and faster to play all around. Bowser's Fury then is equally worth playing, with some very cool new ideas that we really haven't seen before in a Mario game. It sort of hints at where the series could potentially go next, and I love it. Plus, the soundtrack, it's just superb. Take a listen. So yeah, this is the kind of release I really like then. It assembles everything that was great about the original game and bundles it up with an entirely new game as well, offering a generally improved experience across the board. It's a complete edition, if you will. In that sense, this is certainly a case where, even though I had access to a Nintendo-provided review code, I do plan to pick up a retail copy for my collection when it becomes available. It's just one of those games you'll want to own. Well, if you enjoy Mario, that is. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, as always, be sure to let us know. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, check out our Patreon, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.
A breakthrough in design and engineering, the G915 features Lightspeed Pro-grade wireless, advanced LightSync RGB, and new high-performance, low-profile mechanical switches. Meticulously crafted from premium materials, the G15 is a sophisticated design of unparalleled beauty, strength and performance. Meet G15 Lightspeed and play the next dimension.